Samuel. And of course, many of you will remember him. And so I'm going to keep it fairly short because you can add to him. But in fact, you could write a whole book about him. He's a really fascinating man. And most of us in the Alliance, if we met him in his third or fourth period of ministry with the International. But he was there right from the start. And whatever happened in the International, he knew about it, and he was part of it. And I'll give you time just to share a few thoughts about him as well. So its story begins with his father, Elijah Bendel Samuel, leaving Kovna in Lithuania and coming to Birmingham in the United Kingdom. And the story is that he was on top of a ladder in a biscuit factory, and he swore, and a Christian who worked in the biscuit factory pulled him up and started witnessing to him, and he became a believer. And then Elijah Bendel Samuel worked with the Mildmay Mission, one of the largest Jewish ministries of the day. Samuel Wilkinson was in that ministry. Joseph Rabinowitz was supported a bit by that ministry. And Harcourt was born in the mission headquarters in 1904, the first of 5 children at Whitechapel, the Jewish community in London. Now, Harcourt had business and financial training. And really, we need to think of him as like a chief operations officer. They didn't use that title. They talked about secretaries and treasurers, but really he had significant business skills and financial skills, which he learned in a secular company, the London and Globe Insurance Company. And then he was drafted in by his father to assist in organizing the first international Hebrew Christian Alliance conference in London in 1925. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yes, perfectly. It's excellent.
There's a lot to him, so I'm just going to give you the outline of. He then was the assistant to the treasurer, and the treasurer was Mayor Gold Levin, who died quite young, and he became the treasurer. And then he was appointed what I think we would call the COO, the Chief Operations Officer. They called it the General Secretary. And he was involved. He took the minutes. He convened the meetings. He was part of the Hebrew Christian Church Commission, which advocated for the setting up of Hebrew Christian churches and the supporting of Hebrew Christian churches. And then when the war came, Second World War, they put it on hold. And we know something of the history of that. We've relived it in the 70s and 80s. Jacob Peltz was appointed as secretary for the International, and Harcourt continued as recording secretary, like the official secretary of the company and the treasurer. And then Peltz had to return to the USA, and so Harcourt became the secretary for Europe. And let me move on. And then he was also, he was a very responsible guy. That's a younger Harcourt. As a Baptist minister, that was the second of his careers, if you like. And he was a trustee of Abraham's Vineyard, the property which was originally on the outskirts of Jerusalem, now just by Mea Shearim. But then they sold that, unfortunately. They were looking for property in Gaza, property all over the place. It eventually became a foundation, but no property, a great shame. And then he assisted in the purchase of Memorial House in Draycott Street, which was a large hostel for refugees. And in fact, he set up and assisted in the purchase of 7 other hostels in the UK for German Jewish refugees who were called non-Aryan Christians. They were Christians who were not fully Aryan. They were Jewish. They had a parent or a grandparent. We don't know how genuine some of their faith was, but Harcourt was managing these and running these as well, and traveling to assist in the other alliances. I have stacks of letters, hundreds of letters from him, just making all the arrangements with all the different alliances. And there's so much material. That's a picture of him. You can see him with his bow tie in the bottom, in the middle, second row. Many of us remember him wearing a bow tie. He was very dapper, very elegant, and very typically sort of unassuming British, actually. and his key issues that he had to deal with. And the interesting thing is he doesn't put himself forward. He's always talking about other people. In the, you see this book that I'll come to it, Recollections of the Early Years. You say, well, what was Harcourt doing? He doesn't say what he was doing, but he was basically enabling everyone else. He organized the first international conference with Leon Leveson, finds a successor to Sir Leon Leveson, who was Arnold Frank of Hamburg. He was there when Hugh Schoenfield, who wrote the Passover plot, wasn't able to affirm the deity and the incarnation of Yeshua as truly human and truly divine. He was helping refugees. He was helping the work in Israel. He was even gently helping when the IHCA became the IMJA, and we all know the history of that. But he had other careers as well. And most Alliance people don't know that he was not only a successful Baptist minister, but he was elected mayor of Ramsgate, a town on the south coast of Britain, much bombed during the war and much in need of social welfare and projects. And he was a popular minister and a popular mayor and city councillor. They called them aldermen. Aldermen are like city councillors. And he was chairman of the Civil Defence Committee, and this was after the bombing. Ramsgate had to be rebuilt like many other towns. Vice chairman of the Housing and Town Planning Committee, vice president of the Kent and Sussex Baptist Association, chair of the General Hospital Fund, and that's a memorial to him. He was very much responsible for the building of the local hospital. This was before we had the National Health Service, so it was privately funded hospitals. And there's even a ward that was named after him, the Harcourt Samuel Ward, in that hospital. Sadly, the hospital has now been pulled down, but there was a Harcourt Samuel Ward. And he was given the Order of the British Empire, which is one of the highest honors anyone can receive, for his work for the Thanet Disablement Advisory Committee, which was helping people with physical and mental handicaps to get jobs and to get work. So he was really a philanthropist and a charity man, a non-profit man, as much as working in the Alliance. And you say, well, what did he do full time? And I think he did 3 full-time jobs. He was a Baptist minister, he was a local government official, and of course with the Alliance. You can see in the top right here, he is welcoming Princess Margaret, the Queen's sister, at a visit of the hospital. And you can see him there under the blue. He's having his photo taken with all the nurses in the hospital. And that was the building that they had originally, and he was responsible for renewing it. And I don't know if you can, they're giving him a nice new television there, so he's a bit older. And who do you think the lady is on the right amongst the nurses on the left-hand side?
I don't know.
I think that's Irene Hyde, his daughter.
Really? Oh, which one? In the right?
On the right, this one here.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So that's Irene and Harcourt in Ramsgate doing something for the hospital. So he had a 3-fold ministry. Ministering in the Christian church, which is Christ's chosen instrument. Now, he spoke the language of Hebrew Christians. We have to allow for that. But he saw himself with this 3-fold ministry as a minister of the gospel, especially in the Baptist church, entering public life and serving the Lord there. And he was re-elected mayor 4 times. That meant he was well received, well popular, and very efficient. You know, I think most of what he did was under the surface. He wasn't a charismatic preacher. He wasn't a big political figure who was pushing his weight around, but he just got things done. And then especially among his own people, Israel. There's another picture of him at the hospital. And I found a Facebook post, which I thought was very interesting. A man called Vincent Evans said this: Reverend Harcourt was one of those people who put other people first. As a young lad, I got to know him when a member of the BB, that's the Boys Brigade, it's like the Scouts, or the Cubs, when a member of the Boyd Brigade at Cavendish, and he always had time to speak to us, and in a way that was on our level and not down to us. During the war, he could have moved from Ramsgate because it was being bombed, but he stayed, as he said, there was people here who need him. Think more things should carry his name. So that's somebody who just met him as a young boy who was profoundly impacted by his life. And Harcourt reflects on this, and I'll put this in the chat, the recollections of the IHCA early years, in case you don't have a copy. And he said this about his work in 1925. I look back to 1925 and I say without any hesitation that no one had any idea what they had before us, or what the Alliance was to do, or even what it was to become. In those days, when you believers were in there, you believers were in there in twos and threes, sorry, we certainly had no idea then of what God has been doing in more recent years. However, I think that the Alliance has been able to serve his purpose, God's purpose, right through the changing situation. In closing, and this is about his own Jewish identity and sense of calling, he said, and Joel, you would remember being there when he said this, and Paul as well, I think. In closing, I would like to say that I value my heritage more than I can tell you. I am glad that I can say that I'm a Hebrew Christian or that I'm a Messianic Jew, as long as you do not narrow that second term. I am happy to be one of you, but I'm very concerned, and this is his word maybe for us today. Not only I, but all of us should remember that we are part of the one body of Messiah. One thing that any Hebrew Christian church, any Messianic fellowship must ever keep in mind is that it is not something apart. It is something within the church which Messiah loved and for which he gave himself. My aim through all my service has been that we should live together in unity. I have tried to be a peacemaker when it was necessary. And if you will let me say so, I cannot tell you how thankful I am for all the love and all the trust which successive generations of Hebrew Christians, have placed on me. My typing got bad. I wish I was more worthy of it. You see, a very humble man.
Yeah.
And a very shy man, actually. And Fred Levison said this: he was a second generation Hebrew Christian. He sat loose to most of the feasts, fasts, and traditions of Israel, at the same time joining those groups of Hebrew Christians who find inspiration in them. His mildness of manner and ready friendliness conceal both a spiritual depth and a business acumen, which, along with the willingness to carry a heavy workload, have made him a prime asset to the Alliance. May the writer, that's Fred Levison, be permitted to add, he is greatly loved and none could wish for a better brother. And of course, Harcourt continued until he was 90, and he continued as a chaplain to the Royal Air Force Base nearby. So this is him at 90 being presented with a certificate of gratitude. And his hope and his feeling was just this: it is in him, in Yeshua I live, and I hope to continue to serve him as he shall enable me until faith becomes sight. In other words, until I go to be with the Lord. And in his presence, I find what he has promised.